morning, Rick. Good morning, Reed. Good to see you guys.
It's great to see you this morning, Terry. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. I'm wondering if you could maybe just start this off, Terry, by giving us a little background about yourself and your golf course agronomy background and so forth.
I'm a third generation golf course agronomist. I grew up in Glenview, Illinois. I attended Penn State University and graduated in their turfgrass management program. I also graduated from the Golf and Park Facility Administration program at the University of California in Irvine. I'm a master greenkeeper. There's only 72 of us in the world, as awarded by the British and International Golf Greenkeepers. I'm a certified golf course superintendent since 1978 from the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. I'm a former PGA Tour agronomist and advanced tournament official. I used to set up all 47 tournaments we all see on television. I'm a former golf course superintendent at the Riviera Country Club in Los Angeles, Castle Pines Golf Club in Denver, the Golf Club of Oklahoma and Tulsa, and the Double Eagle Club in Columbus, Ohio. I have performed objective third-party independent golf course agronomy infrastructure consulting services for the greens at the Country Club. I do not own or manage any club facilities. I'm totally independent, unbiased, and therefore do not pose any conflicts of interest or have any hidden agendas. I'm not an in-house agronomist for any golf course architects, golf course builders, golf associations, or other golf entities, nor do I represent any golf course equipment or material suppliers.
It's great. Obviously an impressive background, and we certainly appreciate you filling us in on that a little bit. So you were on site at Birmingham Country Club in early August of this year. Can you give us just an idea of your impressions of our golf course and our club in general, just kind of a brief impression that you had from being here?
Yes, I was at the club on August 20th and 21st of this year, and I've heard many things, good things about Birmingham Country Club over the years. I've done some consulting at Oakland Hills and other clubs in your area, and the club has exceeded my expectations. The ambience, the five-star feeling, the spirit of the membership, the golf course design, the rolling hills, the beauty, the location in Birmingham, it's second to none. Very impressed.
Great, we appreciate that. So based on your background and your stellar reputation in this line of work, and we brought you in to do an inspection of our greens. As you know, we're having some problems in mid-July with our green surfaces. So we brought you in to give us your recommendation and to address the challenges that we've been facing. Can you fill us in on what your findings were specifically on our greens when you were here in August?
Yes, I have a 55-page due diligence golf course agronomy and infrastructure checklist. I spent 2 days with Dan Dingman, the golf course superintendent. We went over my checklist. We went out on the golf course and took cup cutters that's used for changing the hole locations on all 18 regulation greens, the putting green, the chipping green, and the greens turf nursery. I took digital color photos and I included them in my 52-page comprehensive written report along with captions. There's two standards of the industry for building greens. Up to 1960, push-up greens construction was the standard up until 1960, as I mentioned. And then since 1960, the United States Golf Association recommendations for a method of putting green construction has been the standard and is still is the standard used worldwide for building greens. There's 12 original Tom Bigelow design greens. They're 104 years old. They were built to push-up construction techniques. They used horses and whatever equipment they had all those years ago, and they just literally took the soil and pushed it up and made the contours and put grass on it. There's no subsurface drainage. There's no smile drains. There's no gravel blanket. They strictly rely on surface drainage. There's 5 greens, which are the putting green, numbers 2, 10, 12, and 13, that were built in the 60s and 70s. They were also built to push up construction techniques. They used a little bit more modern equipment, obviously, but they just took the soil they had and pushed it up, and no drainage, no gravel blanket, no smile drains, anything like that. In 2015, during the renovation and regrassing of the greens, 2 greens were rebuilt to USGA modified construction specifications on numbers 6 and 15 greens. They have 90% sand and 10% Dakota peat moss. It's a beautiful blend that drains beautifully. They have 4-inch diameter drainage tile, perforated drainage pipe installed on 15-foot centers. There's a 4-inch gravel blanket underneath the 12 inches of the very depth of the greens mix. And they're performing beautifully. During the regrassing of the greens, all the poania was killed. And there was 2 choices the club had: to kill the grass, strip off all the dead grass, strip off the organic matter, build up underneath that's been building up for years, replacing the top soil that was removed and thatch and organic matter, fumigating and regrassing. Or the second choice was what the club chose, was to kill the grass, leave the dead grass in place, leave the organic matter underneath in place, and do some cultural practices, fumigate it, and seed right into the dead turf and organic matter. The reason this choice was done was because it was a cheaper way to do it, and also with the time constraints that the membership would allow the golf course to be closed, that was the best choice.
Okay, thank you, Terry. You know, one of the things we wanted to look into, and you came to one of our very first committee meetings, I think it was on your first day on site in August, and the committee obviously wanted to go through and vet out all the options and say, because nobody really wants to shut a golf course down again, and if there was an option to get our greens to match the same performance of 6 and 15 without spending the money and taking the time off the course, we'd obviously prefer that. So we asked you, I think, in that meeting about what else could we do? What are some of those options? And in your report, you know, you talked to and identify, I believe, 4 of them. And I'd like you just to speak about those a little bit and, you know, hopefully give us your candid feedback on what, you know, you can't obviously predict an exact performance outcome, but give us what those options are and also maybe your opinion on what the result will be and the timing to get to that result.
Yes, just a prelude to that, the greens, the push-up greens, there's 17 of them, drain poorly, and during heavy rain, the greens are in good condition until July and August. After heavy rainfalls, the greens do not drain properly. And then the disease pressure becomes very prevalent, which is hard to control. Some of these tough diseases are like wet conditions. And all the push-up greens were built poorly, and they're in poor condition. And I give Dan Digman a lot of credit. what he has to put up with trying to keep those greens alive, especially after heavy rainfall and high humidity in July and August. The four options that I listed, as you mentioned, Reed.
So Terry, sorry, just because I think you brought up an interesting point there. You mentioned the greens are in great condition till probably mid-July through August. You mentioned the fact that they don't drain well and that there's disease pressure. Is that disease pressure a result of water and heat at that time of year?
Yes, it is, especially the thatch or the organic matter, thatch and organic matter underneath the turf. It's been building up for years. It builds up faster than it's being removed by aerifying and top dressing and everything. Well, it holds water like a sponge. It's hard to get rid of the water when it's wet, and when it's dry, it's very hard to re-wet. So during July and August, after heavy rainfall, especially after a half-inch or more rainfall, the water's just sitting there, and it's very conductive to disease with high heat and humidity. So it's a major problem, and it's hard to keep the greens alive. On the lower bowl portions of the greens, it's even worse because water surface drains into the bottom of these, where the hole locations are on these bowls on the greens. And they get a lot more wear and even more disease pressure because they hold more water because it's like the bottom of a bathtub. So as far as the four options, the first option is rebuild all the push-up greens to USGA modified specifications. The second option is to the club's been aerifying for years, but the organic matter is being built up faster than it's being removed, and this happens at a lot of clubs. But to remove this organic matter, which is causing all the problems, we can do a drill and fill aerifying process. It's a 7/8-inch diameter aerifier hole, which is very large, a little bit under 1 inch in diameter, but on 8 feet. I'm sorry, 8 inches deep on 7.5-foot centers, and do this aggressively to try and remove the organic matter and inject sand into the aerifier holes so the greens will drain better. I don't think the club would ever put up with this process because the holes will take 2 to 3 months to recover before they're completely filled back in, providing unacceptable bumpy and untrue and poor putting conditions for a 2 to 3 month period.
Would you have to do that once a year or twice a year, maybe a couple times a year?
And for how long?
Ideally twice a year, spring and fall, and it'll take 10 to 15 years to get all that organic matter out of there. I don't think anybody can put up with it for 1 year or even in the spring or the fall, let alone for 10 to 15 years. So I don't think it's a realistic process, but that's one option the club has. Third option is Dan Dingman has done a great job of, he's applied 4 inches of sand top dressing over his 10-year tenure. And that's helped the surface drainage a little bit, but if there's 2 inches of sand right underneath the turf, and there's this 1 to 2 inches of organic matter layer, the sponge that's holding all the water, and then there's another 2 inches underneath that. And if you want to keep applying sand, it'll take 10 more years to apply 4 more inches, which will give 8 inches of sand, and another 10 years for another 4 inches of sand applied, so to get 12 inches of sand to improve the drainage. But again, it's the organic matter layer is still there, and it's
Sure.
got to be removed. And plus these soils, these push-up soils underneath drain poorly, or they don't drain at all.
And that would be the clay that you have in some of your pictures that we see, or the clay like organic matter.
Yes, the soil is very inconsistent. It's a clay loam, which doesn't drain. Clay or a clay loam, it's all different colors and inconsistent. the soils drain poorly, and then you have the organic matter layer, the sponge, as I call it, that holds water, and it's a no-win situation. The fourth option is the club in 2014 added XGD drainage. It's 2-inch diameter pipe on 6-foot centers in 2014 to all the greens, all 18 regulation for the non-USGA greens, regulation greens and the putting green. The chipping green was not done, nor was because it's going to be rebuilt when the driving range is done. It's my understanding. And the greens turf nursery was not done either. The question came up, and by the way, thanks for inviting me to your greens subcommittee meeting, Reed. That was a great meeting, and your committee asked a lot of great questions, and I really enjoyed that. But adding 3-inch diameter or 3-inch, putting pipe on 3-foot centers in between the 6-foot centers that exist right now, it's just a Band-Aid. You might get 5% improvement on drainage, but it's not worth the effort. And it's just a Band-Aid, and it's just a waste of money, in my opinion.
So Terry, and I just, so everybody understands, around here, everybody's talking about the XGD drainage, and that's what you just referred to, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
It helps on push-up greens, but because of the poor soil and all the cultural practices that were not done prior to Dan Digman being here. Dan, since he's been here the last 10 years, has done a lot of great things, but you can only do
Terry, how can you tell that?
It's just by, you've got your turf, you got your 2 inches of sand, you got a layer of organic matter that holds water, or if it dries out, it's hard to re-wet it. There's 2-inch layer, and then there's this poor, lousy soil. And the only areas that are very slightly draining are the XGG pipe areas, but they're on 6-foot centers. If you had put them on 3-foot centers, it's just a Band-Aid. It's just not worth the expense and the time.
And you mentioned the 5% maybe improvement than we may get. So
if we had better subsurface, if we had more sandy soils here on our property, that 3-foot centers might make a little bit of a drainage difference, but with our heavier soils and in the clay soils, you're saying it's just not worth the effort to put that in. Is that right?
That's correct. Very good point. Yeah, the poor soils and the organic matter layer, those two things are just holding water, and it's just not letting it go through. Now, clubs, other clubs that have had better success with XGD have sandier soils and everything, and they had a lot of good cultural practices done for years and years, but unfortunately, the cultural practices prior to Dan getting here were not done very well, and then plus the organic matter layer and the poor soils, it's just it's a losing situation.
okay, so I guess in the end, your conclusion is, or recommendation would be?
My recommendation is to totally rebuild all the push-up greens to a modified USGA recommendation for the method of putting green construction specifications from the USGA.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. The club did a masterful job on number 6 and 15 5 years ago, rebuilding those greens to USGA modified specifications, and they're working perfectly. They drain perfectly. I already mentioned how they were built, and Bruce Hepner did a masterful job. He to restore those greens to Tom Bendelow type design. He used numbers 1, 4, and 17 as an inspiration for the design of 6 and 15 greens, and they're phenomenal. One other thing I'd like to mention, the putting green. The west half of the putting green was designed by Tom Bendelow, and it's got some nice contours in it. The east side was added on in the 60s and 70s. It's pretty flat. So you got two different conditions there from two different architects. Numbers 2, 10, 12, and 13 greens. They're totally out of character with the 12 Tom Bendelow design greens. They're flatter. They're just uncharacteristic. They just don't look like they were designed by Tom Bendelow. Their appearance isn't as good as Tom Bendelow's original 12 greens, the 104-year-old greens. They're flatter, they're uninteresting, and that's another good reason to rebuild all the push-up greens and let Bruce Hebner and Dr. Trey Rogers and Dan Digman, they were the design team for the number 6 and 15 greens to let them oversee the rebuilding of all the remaining push-up greens, along with having a good accredited golf course contractor.
So Terry, just to wrap up, one item that comes up, and I try to explain it, but probably won't do as good a job as you. When you use the term modified spec, some people think that means a lesser than specification, using the word modified. Can you explain a little bit what a modified depth green means and where it came from?
Yes, the USGA construction specifications state that the greens mix level, the 90% sand and 10% Dakota peat moss, should be 12 inches deep. Well, Michigan State University, back in the 80s, came up with a concept of a variable depth on the greens mix. Instead of 12-inch greens mix all the way across the entire green, the upper profile would have more greens mix, and the lower elevations would have more greens mix. And that's the only modification that's been done to it. And it's a proven winner. Well, you can see it on number 6 and 15 at the club. They're performing beautifully. They look good. They play good. And Dr. Trey Rogers, your consultant, has endorsed this also, because he's a professor at Michigan State, but he truly believes in this concept. And
sorry, Terry, just to come back, you kind of said more greens mix at the top and more greens mix in the lower area of the green. You meant less maybe at the top and more in the lower?
Yeah, less at the top, more at the bottom.
That's for surface drainage.
That's so they drain better. They hold moisture in the higher levels, and then they drain better in the lower levels. That's the whole concept. Instead of having 12 inches, more up on top, less in the bottom.
Excellent. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think the club's got a great future. I just think that going through this every summer, where Dan's having a tough time on July and August growing grass on these greens because of high humidity after heavy rainfall. And then the members have to suffer through this every year. I just think it's time to replace the greens so they're all consistently the same. And that would include the chipping green and the greens turf nursery and the putting green. By the way, the putting green is approximately 5,500 square feet. It's entirely too small for the amount of play that the club gets, especially this year with the pandemic. There's been a lot more play, I understand. So I would just close the course down and rebuild all the greens, and then everything's the same. I included 2 charts in my report. One is the life expectancy chart from the American Society of Golf Course Architects, and they say greens should be replaced every 15 to 30 years. Then I wrote an article, magazine article in Golf Course Management magazine titled Assessing Infrastructure, and I have my own chart, and I recommend that push-up greens should be rebuilt every 25 to 50 plus years. And the reason I put plus in there is some greens I've seen, push-up greens, have lasted more than 50 years. but they have really good sandy soil and they drain. And that's the secret, and which is not the case at Birmingham Country Club.
And just maybe one last comment here as we're getting close on time, Terry. What, in your mind, you know, some people say POA. Why don't we just go back to POA? Can you touch on that quickly?
POA is a weed grass. It's not. It provides a good putting surface when it doesn't have seed heads, which seed heads are present. They're grass seed heads. The grass produces little grass seeds, and they provide these terrible bumpy conditions in the spring and fall every year. Every golf course in the world has got poania, including Augusta National. I think there's poania on the moon. I mean, it's really bad stuff. There's 1,600 grasses in the world. It has the shortest root system of any grass, and it loves wet conditions like the push-up greens at the club. And that's where the poania thrived. But as soon as, you have to keep the greens wetter than normal to keep the poania alive, because there's this tiny little root system. And then you got these wet greens at the club, but if the sponge, you know, the organic matter dries out, the POA dies. So the club made a wise decision getting rid of the poania. Dan's done a great job of keeping the poania out of the greens. It's like cancer, it just keeps coming back and you have to constantly replace it. The club made a great choice with Pure Distinction creeping bentgrass 5 years ago when they regrassed all the greens. It was an excellent choice, and it still is an excellent choice. It's one of the top 5 grasses being used quite a bit around the country and around the world. And the club made a great choice, Pure Distinction. There's 4 other great grasses too to choose from, but the Pure Distinction is a proven winner, and you did good.
Well, thank you, Terry.
Terry, thanks so much for spending some time with us this morning and the work you've done at our club. We sincerely appreciate it as we head down this process and figure out what the future is for our greens at Birmingham. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for hiring me, and best of luck to you. And please let me know if I can be of service in the future. Thank you.